The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust that settled like judgment over everything it touched. Rhea Callan sat in the back corner, her traveling dress wrinkled beyond redemption, her hands gripping the worn leather spine of a recipe book that had belonged to her mother. The other passengers, a merchant's wife in pressed calico, two salesmen in city suits, had stopped acknowledging her existence somewhere around the third rest stop. She'd gotten used to that. The driver's voice cut through the afternoon heat. "Ashford Station, 20-minute stop." Rhea gathered her single carpet bag and the recipe book, moving carefully in the cramped space. The merchant's wife pulled her skirts aside as Rhea passed, a small gesture that said everything words couldn't. Rhea pretended not to notice. She'd learned that skill young. The town of Ashford sprawled before her like a stage set. False-fronted buildings lining a wide dirt street, horses tied to hitching posts, women in bonnets moving between the general store and the milliner's shop. Everything looked newer here than back east, shinier somehow, as if the frontier demanded a certain performance of prosperity. Rhea stepped down from the coach, and the performance stopped. Conversations faltered. Eyes tracked her movement. A woman outside the dry goods store whispered something to her companion, and they both looked away quickly when Rhea's gaze swept past them. She'd weighed herself that morning at the last stop, 187 pounds on a 5'6" frame. She knew what they saw. A woman too large, too plain, too past the age where beauty might forgive other shortcomings. She was 32 years old and carried every year in the lines around her eyes and the calluses on her hands. The driver was already unloading luggage. "You staying in Ashford, miss?" "That's the plan." He set her bag down with more care than she'd expected. "Boarding house is down the street. Mrs. Henshaw runs a clean establishment." "Thank you." She picked up her bag and started walking. The boarding house sat 3 buildings down, its sign freshly painted. Henshaw's, rooms for respectable ladies. A gray-haired woman in a severe black dress stood on the porch, sweeping dust that would return within the hour. "Excuse me," Rhea said. "I'm looking for a room." Mrs. Henshaw looked up, and Rhea watched the assessment happen in real time, eyes traveling from face to body to bag to boots, calculating, weighing, finding the balance wanting. "I'm afraid we're full up. The sign says you have vacancies." "The sign's old. Haven't had time to change it." Mrs. Henshaw went back to sweeping. "Try the hotel." The hotel was grander, 3 stories of whitewashed wood with balconies overlooking the main street. The lobby smelled of beeswax and ambition. A thin man with brilliantined hair stood behind the desk, sorting mail with precise movements. "I'd like a room, please." He didn't look up. "How long?" "A week to start. Maybe longer, depending on work." Now he looked up. The assessment again, quicker this time, but no less thorough. "We don't have anything available. I can see room keys on the board behind you. Those are reserved." "All of them?" "All of them." He went back to sorting mail. "There's a boarding house down the street." "I tried there." "Then I can't help you." Rhea stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of her bag, the ache in her feet from 2 days of travel, the familiar burn of humiliation that never quite stopped hurting, no matter how many times you felt it. "Is there anywhere in this town that might have a room?" The clerk finally met her eyes. "Miss, I'm going to be honest with you. Ashford is a particular kind of place. We cater to a certain standard. You might be happier in Red Creek. It's less refined there." The words were polite. The meaning wasn't. Rhea picked up her bag. "Thank you for your honesty." Outside, the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains. She had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. Red Creek was 30 miles away, and there wouldn't be another stage until tomorrow. She walked the length of Main Street, methodically trying every establishment that might offer work or shelter. The restaurant didn't need help. The saloon didn't hire women for the kitchen. The general store owner took one look at her and said his wife wouldn't approve. The laundry was family-run. The milliner actually laughed. By the time she reached the edge of town, the sun was throwing long shadows across the rutted road. Rhea sat down on a bench outside the shuttered telegraph office and opened her recipe book, not to read, but to touch something that felt like home. Her mother had written in the margins, notes about adjusting for altitude, substitutions when ingredients were scarce, small observations about life. "A good meal can change a man's whole day," read one entry. Never underestimate the power of feeding someone exactly what they need. You lost? Rhea looked up. A boy of maybe 14 stood there, all elbows and curiosity, with a bucket of water in one hand. Not lost, just regrouping. You trying to stay in Ashford? Trying being the key word. He set down the bucket. They won't let you, will they? How'd you know? Seen it before. Town's funny about who they let in. He kicked at a rock. There might be one place, but it's not in town. I'll take any suggestion at this point. Voss Ranch, about 5 miles west, Mr. Calder's place. He lost his cook 2 weeks back and the hands are getting mean about the food. 5 miles. It's a walk, but the road's decent. You'd make it before full dark if you started now. The boy studied her face. You don't care what you look like. Just whether you can do the job. Rhea stood up, testing the weight of her bag. 5 miles after 2 days on a stagecoach. 5 miles into unknown territory to ask a stranger for work she might not get. Which way? The boy pointed to a rutted track that split off from the main road. Follow that west. You'll see the ranch gate when the land starts to drop toward the creek. Can't miss it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Mr. Calder's not an easy man. Neither am I. The boy grinned. Then you might just make it. The walk started easy enough. The road was worn but solid, cutting through scrubland dotted with juniper and sage. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the late spring warmth. Rhea settled into a rhythm, bag in one hand, recipe book tucked under her arm, eyes on the horizon. The first mile passed in silence, broken only by birdsong and the crunch of her boots on packed earth. The second mile brought blisters. The third brought doubt. By the fourth mile, Rhea was starting to question the wisdom of walking into wilderness based on advice from a teenage boy. Then she saw the gate. It wasn't much. 2 posts and a crossbeam with Voss Ranch burned into the wood in plain letters. But beyond it, the land opened into something that looked almost welcoming. A creek ran through a shallow valley, cottonwoods clustered along its banks, and in the distance, buildings formed a rough compound against the darkening sky. Rhea walked through the gate and down the slope toward the ranch. As she got closer, details emerged. A main house, sturdy but weathered. A bunkhouse with smoke rising from its chimney. Corrals holding horses and cattle. Barns and outbuildings in various states of repair. And men. A dozen or more moving between buildings with the end-of-day weariness of people who'd worked hard and expected no reward for it. One of them spotted her first. "We got company!" The call brought others. Within seconds, Rhea was surrounded by a loose circle of ranch hands, sunburned, dusty men whose eyes held the same assessment she'd been subjected to all day. "You lost, ma'am." This from an older man with a scar across his jaw. "I'm looking for Mr. Voss. I heard he might need a cook." "You heard right." A different voice, and the circle parted to let through a tall man in his late 30s, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of lean build that came from hard work and irregular meals. "I'm Calder Voss. Who sent you?" "A boy in town. He didn't give his name." "And you walked 5 miles on his word?" "I didn't have better options." Calder studied her with an intensity that was different from the town's judgment. He was looking at capability, not appearance. "You cook?" "Yes." "How well?" "Well enough that you won't lose any more men over bad food." One of the hands laughed. "She's got spirit." Spirit doesn't make good biscuits," Calder said, but there was something less hard in his expression. "When's the last time you cooked for a crew?" "Logging camp in Oregon. 23 men? Fed them for 8 months before the season ended." "Why'd you leave?" "Camp closed. I've been moving since." Calder looked at the darkening sky, then back at Rhea. "You understand what you're asking for. This isn't a restaurant. It's 3 meals a day for 12 men who work hard and eat harder. Breakfast at 4:30, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Budget's tight. Supplies come once a week. You'll work alone." "I've worked under worse conditions. I can't pay much." "How much is not much?" "Room, board, and $8 a week." It was less than she'd hoped, but more than nothing. "I'll need to see the kitchen before I agree." One of the men whistled low. "She's negotiating." "Quiet, Hank." Calder gestured toward a building attached to the main house. "Come on." The kitchen was a disaster. Dried food crusted on every surface, a stove that looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned in weeks, provisions scattered without organization, and a smell that suggested something had died behind the icebox. Rhea set down her bag and walked through the space, opening cabinets, checking supplies, running her finger along the edge of the work table. Behind her, Calder waited in the doorway. "Who's been cooking since your last person left?" "The hands, taking turns. As you can see, none of them have the skill for it." For the time, by the look of things, Rhea turned to face him. "I'll need 1 full day to clean and organize before I cook anything. I'll need access to your inventory so I can plan meals around what you have. And I'll need your word that the men won't interfere in this kitchen once I've got it running." That's a lot of demands for someone who hasn't proven she can do the job. That's the point. I can't prove anything in a kitchen like this. Give me the day to set up, then give me 3 days of meals. If your men aren't satisfied by the end of that, I'll leave without pay. Calder crossed his arms. "You're that confident?" "I'm that good." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. 1 week trial. Starting tomorrow. Room's in the back. It's small but private. Meals are on the schedule I gave you. You miss one, you're done. You poison anyone, you're done. You can't handle the work, you're done. Understood. "Hank!" Calder called out. The scarred man appeared in the doorway. "Show Miss Callan, Rhea Callan. Show Miss Callan to the cook's room. Make sure she has what she needs." Hank nodded. "Yes, sir. This way, ma'am." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. But it had a door that locked and a window that opened, and after the day Rhea had endured, it felt like luxury. "Outhouse is out back," Hank said. "Pump's in the yard. You need anything, bunkhouse is right there. Most of the boys are decent, but you have any trouble, you tell Mr. Calder." "Thank you." Hank hesitated in the doorway. "We've had 3 cooks in 2 years. None of them lasted more than a month. It's hard work, and Mr. Calder doesn't tolerate excuses." "Neither do I." He smiled at that. "Get some rest. 4:30 comes early." After he left, Rhea sat on the bed and allowed herself one moment of stillness. Her feet throbbed, her back ached. She smelled of stagecoach and failure and desperation. But she had a job. For a week, anyway. She unpacked her bag, placing her few possessions in the chest of drawers, setting her mother's recipe book on the small table beside the bed. Then she walked back to the kitchen and started working. She worked through the evening and into the night, scrubbing surfaces until her hands were raw, organizing supplies by type and usage, checking the stove's flues and dampers, inventorying what she had to work with. It wasn't much. Basic staples, some canned goods, salt pork, dried beans, flour that had seen better days. But it was enough. Around midnight, Calder appeared in the kitchen doorway. "You should be sleeping." "I will be. Soon." Rhea didn't stop working. "Is the town hostile to this ranch? Or just to outsiders in general?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Why do you ask?" "Because I got turned away from every establishment in Ashford today, and I'm wondering if taking this job makes me part of whatever grudge they're nursing." Calder leaned against the doorframe. "The ranch and the town have differences. Some people there think I run my operation wrong. Hire the wrong people. Don't conform to their standards." "And do you?" "Hire the wrong people. Depends on who you ask. I hire based on whether someone can do the job, not whether they fit some imaginary ideal." He paused. "That's going to include you now. I can handle town politics." "Can you? Because they'll use you to get at me. They'll talk. They'll make assumptions. They'll treat you worse than they already did." Rhea wrung out her cleaning rag and met his eyes. "Mr. Voss, I've been treated badly by better people in nicer places. Whatever Ashford throws at me, I've survived worse. You always this stubborn? Only when I need to be." He almost smiled. "Get some sleep, Miss Callan. 4:30 comes whether you're ready or not." She did sleep, but only for a few hours. At 3:30, she was back in the kitchen, building the fire in the stove, mixing biscuit dough, putting coffee on to boil. By the time the first men started stirring in the bunkhouse, the kitchen smelled like civilization. They came in slowly, drawn by the aroma, their expressions shifting from suspicion to cautious hope. "That coffee?" one asked. "Fresh made. Sit down." They sat, 12 men at 2 long tables, watching her move through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She served them biscuits with gravy, fried potatoes with onions, eggs scrambled with bits of the salt pork, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of eating. Then Hank spoke. "Miss Callan, this is the best breakfast I've had in 6 months. It's just biscuits and gravy." "Yeah, but they're good biscuits, and the gravy's not lumpy, and the potatoes are actually cooked through." He looked around the table. "Right, boys?" A chorus of agreement rose from the men. One of them, a young hand with sunburned cheeks, looked close to tears. "I didn't think food could taste like this anymore," he said quietly. Rhea felt something shift in her chest. This was why she cooked. Not for the money or the security or even the survival. For this, the moment when food stopped being fuel and became comfort, memory, hope. There's more if anyone wants seconds. They wanted seconds and thirds. By the time the meal ended and the men headed out to start their day's work, the serving bowls were empty and the coffee pot was drained. Calder was the last to leave. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, studying her with that same intense focus. "That was good. It was adequate. I'll do better once I understand what you have available and what the men prefer. They'll prefer anything that's not burned or raw." He put on his hat. "You've earned yourself another day, Miss Callan." She watched him go, then turned back to the disaster of dirty dishes and used pans. Her back already ached. Her feet were still sore from yesterday's walk. She had lunch to prepare in 6 hours and dinner after that, and this was only day 1. But the men had eaten well. They'd left satisfied. And for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, Rhea felt like she might actually belong somewhere. The morning passed in organized chaos. Rhea cleaned up from breakfast while simultaneously preparing lunch. A hearty stew that could simmer for hours, cornbread that would feed the crew, a dried apple cobbler that would use up fruit that was starting to turn. She worked steadily, falling into the rhythm that had sustained her through years of professional kitchens and rough camps. At noon, the men came in hungry and left satisfied. Hank lingered after the others had gone. "You settling in all right?" "Well enough. The boys are already talking about you, in a good way," he added quickly. "They're saying maybe you'll stick around. That depends on Mr. Voss. And on whether you can handle the isolation. This ranch is 5 miles from town, and town doesn't much care for us. It can get lonely out here." Rhea smiled. "I've been lonely in rooms full of people. At least here, the quiet is honest." That evening, she served dinner, pot roast with vegetables, more of the cornbread, the apple cobbler, and watched the men eat with the same grateful intensity they'd shown at breakfast. Calder ate silently, but she noticed he took seconds of the cobbler. After the men cleared out, he approached her at the wash basin. "You've made it through day 1. "I have." "The men are impressed. They were just hungry for decent food." "It's more than that." He picked up a dish towel, surprising her by staying to help dry. "They've been demoralized. Bad food, long hours, feeling like nobody cares whether they live or die. You changed something today." "I just fed them." "Don't diminish it. Feeding people well, it matters, especially out here." He set down a dried plate. "You've earned the rest of your week. After that, if you want to stay, the job's yours permanent." Rhea turned to look at him. "Just like that?" "I don't make offers I don't mean. You're good at this. The kitchen hasn't run this smoothly since—" He trailed off. "Since?" "Since my wife was alive. She did the cooking before. Had a gift for it." His expression didn't change, but something in his voice did. "She died 3 years ago. Fever. Since then, it's been a rotating disaster. I'm sorry for your loss. It's past." He hung up the towel. "Point is, you've proven yourself. The job's yours if you want it." "I want it." "Then it's settled. $8 a week, room and board, 1 day off a month if we can spare it." "Deal." They shook hands, and Rhea felt the calluses on his palm, the same kind of earned roughness she carried on her own hands. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed with the window open to the sound of crickets and distant cattle, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The job was hers, yes. The men were satisfied. Calder seemed pleased. But the town was still out there. And from everything she'd learned, Ashford didn't forgive easily. The first 3 days passed without incident. Rhea established her rhythm, early rising, 3 solid meals, constant preparation. The men's morale visibly improved. They joked more, worked harder, complained less. Even the horses seemed calmer. On the 4th day, trouble arrived. Ria was preparing lunch when she heard horses in the yard. Too many horses, moving too fast. Through the window, she saw 5 men dismounting, all wearing town clothes and expressions that meant nothing good. Calder met them outside. From the kitchen, Ria couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. Accusation, defense, rising tension. Then one of the town men pointed at the house, at the kitchen window where Ria stood. She stepped back, but not before they saw her. The confrontation lasted another 5 minutes before the town men mounted up and rode out. Calder stood in the yard, fists clenched, watching them go. When he came into the kitchen, his expression was carefully blank. "What did they want?" Ria asked. "To remind me that Ashford has standards, to suggest that my hiring practices reflect poorly on the whole county, to imply that certain people," he paused, "aren't suitable for respectable establishments." "They meant me." "Yes." Ria turned back to her work. "And what did you tell them?" "That who I hire is my business, not theirs. That they can keep their standards in town, but out here, competence matters more than appearances." He paused. "I also told them that if they had a problem with my cook, they could come eat her food and then complain." Despite everything, Ria smiled. "That was foolish. Probably. But I meant it." He moved closer. "They're going to make trouble, Ria. For you, for me, for the ranch. Town has influence. They can pressure suppliers, turn customers away, make life difficult." "Are you asking me to leave?" "No, I'm warning you what staying will cost." She met his eyes. "I've paid worse prices for worse jobs. I'm not leaving." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "All right then." He straightened. "But if things get dangerous, I can handle danger." "Can you handle cruelty? Because that's what's coming." Ria thought about every rejection, every sideways look, every closed door she'd faced in 32 years of being exactly who she was. "Yes," she said quietly, "I can handle cruelty." That Sunday, Ria made her first trip back to Ashford. She needed supplies that the ranch couldn't provide: spices, baking powder, a few items to expand her limited repertoire. Calder offered to send Hank with her, but she refused. "I need to face this town on my own terms." The general store fell silent when she walked in. The proprietor, a round man named Garrett, looked up from his ledger with obvious displeasure. "We don't serve Voss Ranch." "Since when?" "Since now. New policy." "You served them last week." "Circumstances have changed." His eyes traveled over her in that familiar, insulting way. "Perhaps if the ranch maintained better standards, we might reconsider." Ria set her shopping list on the counter. "I need these items. I can pay cash." "I told you. And I'm telling you that refusing service based on who someone works for is a quick way to lose business." She kept her voice level, reasonable. "I'm not asking for credit. I'm not causing trouble. I'm a paying customer with a legitimate list." The answer is no. Other customers had gathered now, watching the exchange with varying degrees of interest and discomfort. "Is there a problem here, Garrett?" Ria turned. A woman in her 50s stood near the fabric display, well-dressed, but with kind eyes. "No problem, Mrs. Ashford. Just explaining store policy." "Since when do we refuse cash customers?" The woman moved closer. "I'm Eleanor Ashford. My late husband founded this town." "Ma'am," Ria nodded respectfully. Eleanor studied her with sharp intelligence. "You're the new cook at Voss Ranch." "I am. And Garrett here is refusing to sell you supplies." "He is?" Eleanor turned to the proprietor. "That's interesting, considering my husband's vision was for Ashford to be a place of commerce and opportunity. Refusing a paying customer seems contrary to that vision. Mrs. Ashford, with respect, there are certain standards. There are, indeed, standards of fairness, decency, and business practice, none of which are being demonstrated right now." She picked up Ria's list. "I'll help her gather these items. You'll add them to my account." "But my account, Garrett, unless you'd like to refuse me service as well?" The man's face reddened, but he nodded. Eleanor walked with Rhea through the store, collecting items with efficient grace. I apologize for this treatment. Not everyone in Ashford shares the same narrow perspective. You don't need to apologize for others. Perhaps not, but I can at least try to balance the scales. She handed Rhea a jar of vanilla extract. Calder Voss is a good man. He took care of my husband in his final illness, sat with him when even I couldn't bear it. The town owes him more than this petty cruelty. Why do they hate him? Because he doesn't conform. Because he judges people by their character rather than their pedigree. Because his wife was a native woman, and their love challenged certain people's sense of order. Eleanor's expression hardened. My husband fought against that prejudice until he died. I continue the fight in what ways I can. They finished gathering supplies and returned to the counter, where Garrett rang up the items with obvious reluctance. Thank you, Rhea said to Eleanor. I'll repay you. You'll do no such thing. Consider it an investment in good cooking. I remember your predecessor's meals fondly. She smiled. Perhaps you'll be the one who finally stays. Walking back to the ranch, bags heavy with supplies, Rhea thought about Eleanor's words, about staying, about belonging, about the possibility that this harsh, beautiful place might actually become home. She was still thinking about it when she reached the ranch and found chaos. Men running, shouting, Calder's voice cutting through the noise. Get the doctor! Now! Rhea dropped her bags and ran. In the bunkhouse, a young ranch hand, the one who'd nearly cried over her first breakfast, lay on a cot, his skin flushed with fever, his breathing labored. Calder knelt beside him, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. What happened? Rhea demanded. Fever came on sudden. He was fine this morning, then collapsed during afternoon chores. Calder's face was tight with worry. Hank's riding for the doctor, but it's 15 miles. He won't make it back before nightfall. Rhea pushed forward, pressing her hand to the boy's forehead. Burning hot. She pulled back his eyelid, pupils responsive but sluggish, checked his pulse. Too fast. Too weak. How old is he? 19. Name's Charlie Reeves. Charlie, Rhea spoke firmly. Charlie, can you hear me? A faint moan. Get me clean water, whiskey, and every blanket you can find, she ordered. And someone get my bag from the cook's room. There's a small wooden box in the bottom. Bring that too. The men scattered to follow her commands. You know medicine? Calder asked. Enough. My mother was a camp nurse before she married. She taught me. Rhea was already pulling off Charlie's boots, checking his extremities. This looks like mountain fever. Comes on fast, burns hot, can kill in 2 days if you don't break it. How do we break it? Carefully. She took the water and whiskey that Hank's partner brought. We cool him down slowly, keep him hydrated, and if he starts shaking, we warm him up. It's a balance. What can I do? Stay with me. I'll need help if he convulses. For the next 6 hours, Rhea and Calder worked in synchronized silence. They bathed Charlie with cool water when his fever spiked, wrapped him in blankets when the chills came, forced water and willow bark tea between his cracked lips. Rhea drew on every scrap of knowledge her mother had taught her, every trick learned in mining camps and logging operations where the nearest doctor was days away. Midnight came and went. Charlie's fever peaked, and for one terrible moment Rhea thought they'd lost him. His breathing stopped, his body went rigid. Then he coughed, gasped, and drew in a ragged breath. The fever broke. By morning, Charlie was weak but conscious, asking for water in a voice like sandpaper. Rhea gave him broth, weak tea, and strict orders to stay in bed. You saved his life, Calder said quietly. They stood outside the bunkhouse, watching the sun rise over the mountains. I did what needed doing. It was more than that. He turned to look at her, and in the early light, she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. You could have stayed in the kitchen. This wasn't your job. Yes, it was. No, your job is cooking. This was... He trailed off, searching for words. This was caring. There's a difference. Maybe. Rhea was too tired to parse the implications. How long until the doctor gets here? Should be any time now. Hank made it to town last night. The doctor arrived an hour later. An older man who examined Charlie confirmed Rhea's diagnosis and treatment and grudgingly admitted she'd done everything right. You studied medicine? He asked her. No, just learned from necessity. Well, you learned well. The boy would be dead if you'd waited for me. He packed up his bag. If you ever want formal training, there's a nursing program in San Francisco. I'll keep that in mind. After the doctor left, the ranch settled into uneasy normalcy. Charlie was moved to a quieter corner of the bunkhouse to recover. The men returned to work. Rhea returned to the kitchen. But something had shifted. The men looked at her differently now, not just as the cook, but as someone who'd fought for one of them. Someone who belonged. That evening, as she served dinner, Hank stood up. Boys, I think we owe Miss Callan our thanks. She didn't have to stay up all night with Charlie. She didn't have to risk getting sick herself. But she did. She saved his life. A murmur of agreement ran through the room. To Miss Callan, Hank raised his cup. Best cook and best nurse this ranch has ever seen. To Miss Callan! They drank, and Rhea felt her throat tighten with emotion she couldn't quite name. Later, Calder found her in the kitchen, washing the last of the dinner dishes. You all right? Just tired. You should be. You haven't slept in 36 hours. He picked up a towel and started drying. The men mean what they said. You're one of us now. After only 2 weeks? After saving Charlie's life, out here, that matters more than time. He set down a plate. But it also means you're going to be a target. The town already didn't like me hiring you. Now they're going to see you as a threat. Why? Because you're proving them wrong. Every day you're here, every meal you cook, every life you save, it all proves that their judgment was wrong. And people don't like being proven wrong. Rhea met his eyes. I'm not leaving, Calder. It was the first time she'd used his first name. Something flickered in his expression. I know. That's what worries me. Don't worry about me. I can handle whatever comes. Can you? He moved closer. Because what's coming won't be fair. It won't be rational. It'll be personal and cruel, and it'll be designed to break you. Then it'll fail. I don't break. He studied her face for a long moment. No, I don't think you do. The silence between them stretched, filled with things neither of them knew how to say. Then Calder stepped back. Get some sleep, Rhea. Tomorrow's another day. But tomorrow brought more than just another day. It brought a reckoning that neither of them saw coming. The reckoning came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Rhea had saved Charlie's life. She was kneading bread dough when she heard the wagons, not the usual supply delivery, but something heavier, more deliberate. Through the kitchen window, she watched 3 freight wagons roll past the ranch gate without stopping, heading toward the main road to town. Calder appeared in the doorway, his jaw tight. That was supposed to be our lumber shipment, 6 weeks of orders. They just drove past. I saw. He pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. That's the second supplier this month. Last week it was feed grain. Week before that, the blacksmith refused to shoe our horses. Rhea wiped flour from her hands. The town's organizing against you. Against us. Make no mistake, you're part of this now. He leaned against the door frame. I can handle the business pressure, find new suppliers, pay more to have goods freighted from Red Creek. But it's going to get harder before it gets easier. How much harder? Hard enough that I need to know if you're really committed to staying, because if you're not, now's the time to say so. No judgment. Rhea looked around the kitchen she'd transformed over 3 weeks. The clean surfaces, the organized pantry, the meals she'd served to men who'd gone from sullen to satisfied. She thought about Charlie, still recovering but alive. About Hank and the other hands who greeted her every morning with genuine warmth. About Calder himself, who'd given her a chance when no one else would. I'm staying. Even if it costs you? I've been paying costs my whole life. At least here, I know what I'm paying for. He nodded slowly. All right then. But Rhea, don't go into town alone anymore. Not until this blows over. I'm not afraid of them. I know. That's what worries me. That afternoon, Eleanor Ashford arrived at the ranch in her private carriage, a rare sight that brought the men out of the barns to stare. She descended gracefully, ignoring the dust on her expensive dress, and asked to speak with Rhea privately. They sat in the small parlor of the main house, tea between them that Eleanor had brought herself. I'll be direct, Eleanor said. There's a movement in town to destroy this ranch, led by Marcus Hendrick and the town council. They're systematizing the boycott. Every supplier, every merchant, every tradesman. They want Calder gone. Why? What did he do? He married a Shoshone woman. He treats his workers like human beings regardless of their background. He refuses to attend the right social functions or pay homage to the right people. Eleanor's expression was grim. But mostly, he makes them feel small by not caring what they think. That's not a crime. No, but in a place like Ashford, it might as well be. She leaned forward. And now you're here, which has given them a new angle of attack. A woman of your build, your appearance, working in close quarters with a widower rancher, and a dozen men. They're constructing a narrative. Rhea felt ice in her stomach. What kind of narrative? The kind that ruins reputations. They're saying the ranch is improper, immoral, that you're not really a cook at all, but something else entirely. Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. I'm telling you this not to frighten you, but to prepare you. They will say vile things. They will try to shame you into leaving. Let them try. My dear, I admire your courage, but you must understand, these people have power. They can make your life unbearable. They already made my life unbearable. That's why I ended up here. Rhea met Eleanor's eyes. I appreciate the warning, but I'm not leaving. If they want me gone, they'll have to drag me out. Eleanor smiled sadly. You remind me of Calder's wife. She had that same fire, that same refusal to bend. She paused. It got her killed, in a way. What do you mean? The fever that took her. She caught it nursing workers that the town doctor refused to treat. Native families, Mexican laborers, people beneath his notice. Sarah went anyway. She always went anyway. Eleanor's eyes were distant with memory. Calder blamed himself, still does. That's why he's so protective now. I'm not Sarah. No, but you're important to him already. I can see it. Eleanor stood. Be careful, Rhea. The world is cruel to women who don't fit its expectations, and it's especially cruel to those who refuse to apologize for it. After Eleanor left, Rhea returned to the kitchen and threw herself into work. She made 3 pies, started 2 loaves of bread, and prepared a stew that would feed 20 people instead of 12 because she needed her hands busy and her mind focused on something other than the weight of Eleanor's warnings. Calder found her an hour later, sleeves rolled up, flour in her hair, working with almost violent efficiency. You all right? Fine. You don't look fine. Then don't look. The words came out sharper than she intended. She stopped, took a breath. Sorry. Eleanor told me about the town's campaign, about what they're saying. I should have told you myself. Would it have changed anything? No, but you deserve to hear it from me. He moved into the kitchen, not touching anything but present in a way that somehow helped. What they're saying, it's garbage, lies meant to hurt. I know. Do you? Because knowing and believing are different things. Rhea turned to face him. You want to know what I believe? I believe that I'm a damn good cook. I believe that every man on this ranch eats better because I'm here. I believe that Charlie Reeves is alive because I knew what to do. Her voice rose. I don't care what some small-minded people in a small-minded town think about my body or my morals or my worth. They don't get to define me. No, they don't. Calder's voice was quiet but intense. But they're going to try. And when they do, it's going to hurt, no matter how strong you are. Then I'll hurt? I've hurt before. I know. That's what kills me. He ran a hand over his face. You shouldn't have to keep hurting just to exist. None of us should, but we do. Rhea went back to her pie dough, rolling it with precise, controlled movements. My mother used to say that the world will always find reasons to tell you you're not enough. Too big, too small, too loud, too quiet. The trick is deciding you're enough anyway. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was, right up until the day she died, believing she wasn't pretty enough to deserve my father's faithfulness. Rhea's hands stilled. She was enough. She was always enough. But she never knew it. Silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the ticking of the stove and the distant sound of men working outside. I'm sorry, Calder said finally. Don't be. Just don't ask me to leave because other people are uncomfortable with my existence. I would never ask that. Good. He left, and Rhea finished her pies. But the conversation stayed with her. The weight of it. The recognition that this fight wasn't just about a job or a place to live. It was about the right to take up space in a world that wanted her small and apologetic. She'd be damned if she'd apologize. The next week brought escalating pressure. More suppliers refused service. The price of goods from Red Creek doubled when word spread about the ranch's troubles. 2 of the hands quit, unwilling to be associated with an establishment under moral scrutiny. Calder absorbed it all with grim determination, but Rhea could see the toll it took. Then Charlie Reeves collapsed again. This time it wasn't fever, but exhaustion. The boy had pushed himself too hard, trying to prove he'd recovered, and his body had simply given out. Rhea found him slumped behind the barn, conscious but pale and shaking. "I'm fine," he mumbled as she helped him up. "Just need a minute." "You need a week in bed and 3 square meals a day." She half carried him to the bunkhouse. "What were you thinking, working a full shift?" "I'm not a weakling." "No one said you were, but you're recovering from an illness that nearly killed you. There's no shame in taking time to heal. The other men want you alive and healthy, not dead from stubbornness." She got him settled on his cot. "I'm bringing you soup and you're going to eat it, and then you're going to sleep until I say otherwise. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." She brought soup, watched him eat, and sat with him while he fell asleep. When she finally emerged from the bunkhouse, Calder was waiting. "How is he?" "He'll live, but he pushed too hard too fast. He's trying to prove something." "I know. Doesn't make it less stupid." Rhea wiped her hands on her apron. "He told me the men who quit said things. About me. About the ranch. He wanted to defend our honor by working harder than everyone else." Calder's expression darkened. "What kind of things?" "The kind you don't repeat, the kind designed to make me feel like I'm the problem." She looked at him directly. "Am I the problem, Calder? Would things be easier if I left?" "Yes, and I don't care." The bluntness of it surprised her. "The ranch would absolutely have an easier time if you weren't here," he continued. "The town would back off. Suppliers would return. I could probably hire back those 2 hands and find others without trouble." He stepped closer. "But I'd be serving meals that barely qualify as food. Charlie Reeves would be dead. And I'd be proving to every small-minded person in Ashford that they were right, that conformity matters more than character. That's a high price to pay for principle." "Some principles are worth the price." His eyes held hers. "You're worth the price." The air between them changed, charged with something neither of them had acknowledged before. Rhea felt her heart hammer against her ribs. "Calder! Rider coming!" Hank's shout broke the moment. "Fast!" They turned to see a horse galloping toward the ranch, its rider bent low over the neck. As it drew closer, Rhea recognized the boy from town, the one who'd first told her about the ranch. He pulled up hard, the horse dancing sideways. "Mr. Voss, Miss Callan! What's wrong?" Calder demanded. "The town, they're planning something, tomorrow. I heard my pa talking with Mr. Hendrick." The boy was breathless. "They're going to the county courthouse, filing some kind of complaint, something about public health and moral standards." "They're trying to shut us down," Calder said flatly. "I think so, sir. And Mr. Hendrick, he was talking about sending the sheriff out here, making it official." Rhea felt cold spread through her chest. Can they do that? If they convince the county that we're operating improperly, they can force an inspection. And if the inspector is someone Hendrick controls, Calder's jaw tightened. They can manufacture violations, close us down for health code infractions, zoning issues, anything they want. That's not legal. It doesn't have to be legal. It just has to be official long enough to destroy us. He turned to the boy. "Thank you for the warning. Does your father know you're here?" "No, sir. I snuck out." "Then you'd better get back before he notices." "And son, thank you. This took courage." The boy flushed with pride, then wheeled his horse and galloped back toward town. Hank had joined them, along with several other hands. "What do we do, boss?" "We prepare. Get the ranch in perfect order, every building, every structure, every single thing that could possibly be cited as a violation. Rhea, I need your kitchen spotless, beyond spotless, hospital-level clean." "It already is." "Make it better." He looked at the assembled men. "Everyone else, we're doing a complete inspection ourselves. If there's anything that could give them ammunition, we fix it, tonight." They worked through the night. Rhea scrubbed surfaces that were already clean, organized supplies that were already organized, made lists of every ingredient and where it came from, documented her food safety practices in meticulous detail. Around her, she could hear the men doing the same, hammering loose boards, mucking stalls, repairing fence lines by lamplight. Dawn found them exhausted but ready. The sheriff arrived at mid-morning with a county inspector and Marcus Hendrick himself, a barrel-chested man with steel-gray hair and eyes like flint. They rode through the gate as if they owned the place. Calder met them in the yard, Rhea and Hank flanking him. "Sheriff Morton, Mr. Hendrick, to what do we owe the pleasure?" "No pleasure in it, Voss." The sheriff was an older man who looked uncomfortable with his task. "Got a formal complaint filed with the county. Public health concerns. We're here to inspect the premises." "Inspect away. We've got nothing to hide." Hendrick dismounted, his lip curling as he looked around. "We'll see about that." They started with the bunkhouse. Rhea watched from the kitchen window as they examined every corner, looking for violations that didn't exist. The men had been thorough. Everything was in order. Then they came to her kitchen. Hendrick walked through the door like he was entering a den of vice. His eyes swept the room looking for fault, hungry for it. The inspector followed, taking notes on a clipboard. "This is where food is prepared?" Hendrick asked. "Yes." Rhea kept her voice level. "By you alone?" "That's right. A woman, cooking for a dozen men, unsupervised. I don't need supervision to cook. I've been doing it professionally for 15 years. "Professionally?" He made it sound obscene. "And where exactly did you acquire this professional experience?" "Logging camps, mining operations, 3 different restaurants, and a hotel in Portland. Rough establishments, I'm sure. Honest establishments where I did honest work." Hendrick picked up a knife from her cutting board, examining it like evidence. "These men eat food prepared by your hands every day? 3 meals a day, and none of them have gotten sick. That you know of. I know of Charlie Reeves, who nearly died from fever 3 weeks ago and survived because I treated him." "Ah, yes. Your miraculous medical intervention." Hendrick set down the knife. "Tell me, Miss Callan, where did you study medicine?" "I didn't. My mother taught me field nursing." "So you practice medicine without a license?" "I provided emergency care when the nearest doctor was hours away. There's a difference." "The law might disagree." The inspector had been examining the stove, the pantry, the work surfaces. He made notes, his expression neutral. "Everything appears clean and well organized. Food storage is proper. No evidence of contamination or unsafe practices." Hendrick's face reddened. "Check again." "I've been thorough, Mr. Hendrick. By every measure I can evaluate, this kitchen meets or exceeds health standards." "Then check other standards, moral standards, propriety standards." "That's not within my purview." The inspector closed his clipboard. "Sheriff, I'm prepared to file my report. No violations found." The sheriff looked relieved. "Then we're done here." "We are not done." Hendrick's voice rose. "This establishment is a blight on the county. A widower rancher, a woman of questionable background, men living in close quarters without proper supervision." "Without proper supervision?" Calder's voice cut through the room like a blade. "This is a working ranch, Hendrick. The men are supervised by me. Miss Callan runs the kitchen with more skill than anyone you've got in that precious town of yours. And unless you can cite an actual law we're breaking, you can take your moral outrage and get off my property." "How dare you have? How dare I? How dare you come here with your manufactured complaints and your thinly veiled bigotry, trying to destroy people's livelihoods because they don't fit your narrow definition of acceptable?" Calder stepped forward. "My wife was a better person than you'll ever be, and this town treated her like dirt because she was native. Now you're trying to do the same to Rhea because she doesn't look the way you think a woman should look. I'm done tolerating it." The room went silent. Even Hendrick seemed momentarily stunned by the directness of the attack. Then his expression hardened. "You'll regret this, Voss. I already regret every minute I've wasted trying to make peace with people like you. Now get out." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Mr. Hendrick, the inspection is complete. We should go." "This isn't over." "Yes," Calder said quietly. "It is." They left. Hendrik radiating fury, the sheriff apologetic, the inspector looking vaguely impressed. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Calder turned to Rhea. I'm sorry. I should have kept my temper. Don't apologize for telling the truth. The truth just made things worse. Or it made things clear. Rhea moved to the window, watching the dust settle on the road. They were never going to leave us alone. At least now we know where we stand. Hank appeared in the doorway. Boss, the men want to talk. All of them. They gathered in the yard, all 10 remaining hands, plus Charlie, who'd dragged himself out of bed against orders. Hank spoke for the group. We heard what you said in there, about Miss Rhea, about the ranch, about not backing down. He looked around at the others. We want you to know, we're with you, all the way. If Hendrik wants a fight, he's got one. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the men. I appreciate that, Calder said, but I need you to understand what you're signing up for. This could get ugly. You could lose work opportunities in Ashford. Your reputations could suffer. Our reputations? One of the younger hands laughed bitterly. Boss, most of us came here because our reputations were already shot. You gave us a chance when no one else would. We're not abandoning that. Besides, another added, Miss Rhea's cooking is worth fighting for. The tension broke into laughter, and Rhea felt something warm bloom in her chest. These rough, hard men who'd been strangers a month ago were now standing with her. For her. Thank you, she said, her voice thick. All of you. You don't know what this means. Yes, we do, Charlie said quietly. It means the same thing it meant when you sat up all night keeping me alive. It means family takes care of family. That night, Rhea couldn't sleep. She sat in her small room, her mother's recipe book open on her lap, thinking about everything that had happened. The confrontation with Hendrik had been inevitable, but it had also been clarifying. Lines had been drawn. Sides had been chosen. A soft knock on her door broke her reverie. It's me, Calder's voice. She opened the door. He stood in the hallway, hair mussed, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. Can't sleep either? She asked. Too much thinking. He paused. Can I come in? Just to talk. She stepped aside, and he entered the small space, somehow making it feel even smaller with his presence. I meant what I said today, he began. About you being worth the price. I need you to know that wasn't just anger talking. I know. Do you? He turned to face her. Because I'm not sure I've been clear. When you first showed up here, I saw someone desperate enough to walk 5 miles on a stranger's word. I thought I was doing you a favor by offering a trial week. You were. No, you were doing me one. In 3 weeks, you've transformed this ranch. The men are happier. The work is better. The whole place feels different. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with his own inability to articulate. What I'm trying to say is, this isn't just about keeping a good cook. It's about keeping you. Rhea's heart hammered. Calder, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know the position you're in. The last thing you need is your employer making inappropriate advances. I just needed you to know that whatever happens with the town, with Hendrik, with any of it, I'm on your side. Not because of what you do for the ranch, but because of who you are. She looked at him, this complicated, wounded man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd defended her publicly, who stood in her doorway at midnight trying to express something he didn't have words for. I need to tell you something, she said, about why I really came here, why I walked those 5 miles. You said you had no other options. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. She took a breath. I'd been rejected by every establishment in Ashford, every door closed, every face turned away. I was sitting on that bench trying to figure out how to survive one more day of being invisible when that boy told me about your ranch, about a place where people were judged by what they could do, not how they looked. It sounded like a fantasy, like something too good to be real, but I was desperate enough to hope it might be true. She met his eyes. And it was. You saw me, actually saw me, when everyone else just looked past or through or around me. That's worth more than you know. Rhea, I'm not finished. I need to say this. Her voice was steady now. I'm not good at trust. Life taught me that most people will disappoint you eventually, but you haven't. You've been exactly who you said you were from the beginning. And whether this thing with the town gets worse or better, I want you to know I'm here because I choose to be. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I want to be. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. Then Calder smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. You're something else, Rhea Callan. So I've been told, not usually as a compliment. It is from me. He left shortly after, and Rhea closed the door, her heart still racing. She knew what was growing between them, knew it was complicated and messy and probably unwise. But for the first time in her life, she didn't care about wise. She cared about true. The morning after Calder's midnight visit, Rhea woke to the sound of angry voices carrying across the ranch yard. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Eleanor Ashford's carriage blocking the gate, with Eleanor herself standing toe-to-toe with Marcus Hendrick. "You have no authority here," Eleanor was saying, her voice sharp as cut glass. "I have every authority. The County Fair Committee just voted to deny Voss Ranch participation in this year's event. That includes all livestock categories, produce displays, and Hendrick's eyes found Rhea emerging from the house. The cooking competition. Rhea felt her stomach drop. The county fair's cooking competition was legendary, a 2-day event that drew judges from as far as San Francisco with a prize purse of $200 and recognition that could make or break a culinary reputation. She'd been planning her entry for weeks, seeing it as a chance to prove her worth on neutral ground. "On what grounds?" Eleanor demanded. "Moral turpitude. We can't have an establishment of questionable character representing Ashford County. The ranch isn't in Ashford. It's in the county at large. The decision stands." Hendrick's smile was cruel. "Though I suppose Miss Callan could always enter as an individual if she can find someone willing to sponsor her. County rules require all entrants to have a local sponsor in good standing." He knew perfectly well no one in Ashford would sponsor her. It was a deliberate humiliation, delivered with the precision of someone who'd planned it. Eleanor's expression hardened. "I'll sponsor her." Silence dropped like a stone. "You'll what?" Hendrick's voice was dangerous. "I'll sponsor Miss Callan for the cooking competition. As a founding family member and widow of Ashford's founder, I'm certainly in good standing. Or are you going to challenge that as well?" Hendrick's face went purple. "Mrs. Ashford, you don't understand what you're doing. The social consequences. I understand perfectly. I'm exercising my right as a citizen to sponsor a contestant, unless the committee wants to publicly state that they're rejecting entries based on personal prejudice rather than merit." She raised an eyebrow. "That would make for interesting conversation at the state capitol, don't you think?" The threat was clear. Eleanor had connections that extended far beyond Ashford's small sphere of influence. Hendrick's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. Then he spun on his heel and mounted his horse. "This isn't over. It never is with men like you." Eleanor watched him ride away, then turned to Rhea. "Well, I hope you're as good a cook as Calder claims." "I am." Rhea's mind was already racing through recipes, strategies, ways to turn this opportunity into a statement. "But Mrs. Ashford, you didn't have to do that. He'll make your life difficult now." "My dear, Marcus Hendrick has been trying to make my life difficult since my husband died and left me with more land and influence than he'll ever have. I'm quite accustomed to it." She smiled. "Besides, I'm rather looking forward to watching you compete. When was the last time Ashford saw a woman refuse to apologize for taking up space?" After Eleanor left, Rhea found Calder in the barn, repairing a saddle with methodical precision that suggested he was working through anger. "You heard?" she asked. "Whole ranch heard. Eleanor doesn't exactly whisper when she's fighting." He set down his tools. "You don't have to do this. The competition, it's going to be a spectacle. They'll use it to humiliate you. Or I'll use it to humiliate them." Rhea, I'm doing this, Calder. Not because Eleanor backed me into it, but because I need to." She moved closer, her voice intense. "They've been trying to make me invisible my whole life. Every town, every job, every time someone looked through me like I wasn't there. But I am here, and I'm done pretending I'm not." He studied her face for a long moment. "You're going to win, aren't you? I'm going to try like hell. What do you need? Time to practice. Access to the best ingredients we can get, and honest feedback from people who'll tell me if something isn't perfect. You'll have it all." He paused. "The men will want to help. They've been talking about the competition since Eleanor left. Charlie wants to ride to Red Creek for special ingredients. Hank's offering to build you whatever equipment you need. They're invested in this. Tell them I'll take all the help I can get. The next 2 weeks became a blur of planning and preparation. Ria tested recipe after recipe, pushing herself to create something that would be technically flawless and emotionally resonant. She settled on a menu that told a story, her story, through food. A beef dish that referenced her time in cattle country. Fresh bread that spoke to the comfort she'd tried to bring to rough places. A dessert that honored her mother's teachings while showcasing her own skill. The men became her testing ground and her cheerleaders. They ate her trial runs with religious attention, offering opinions that ranged from helpful to hilarious. "Needs more salt," Hank said of one attempt. "Needs more pie," Charlie countered about another. "Needs to be exactly like this because it's already perfect," a third hand declared through a mouthful of apple tart. Calder tasted everything but said little, his critiques coming in the form of slight nods or thoughtful pauses that Ria learned to read like a language. One evening, after a particularly successful test of her final menu, he found her in the kitchen washing dishes. "You're ready," he said. "I'm terrified." "Good. Means you care." He picked up a towel and started drying. When Sarah used to compete in tribal gatherings, she'd get this look the night before, like she was preparing for battle. You have that same look now. It was the first time he'd brought up his wife without prompting. Ria felt the trust in that, the vulnerability. Was she a good cook? She was extraordinary. Taught me that food could be more than sustenance, that it could be art, medicine, memory. His hand stilled on the plate he was drying. She'd have liked you, your stubbornness, your refusal to bend. I'm not trying to replace her. I know, that's not what I'm saying. He set down the plate and turned to face her. I'm saying she'd have recognized a kindred spirit. Someone who knows that sometimes the most radical act is just refusing to disappear. The intimacy of the moment wrapped around them, broken only when Charlie burst through the door with news that he'd secured a sponsor willing to freight special ingredients from San Francisco. The day before the competition, disaster struck. Ria woke to find half her carefully hoarded supplies missing. Not the everyday staples, but the special ingredients she'd collected for the competition. The expensive vanilla, the imported chocolate, the aged vinegar she'd been saving for her dressing. She tore through the pantry, her heart sinking with each missing item. Calder found her sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by inventory lists, her face pale. Someone broke in last night, took everything I need for tomorrow. Hendrik. Had to be. No one else would know what to take. She wanted to cry, wanted to scream, but all she felt was a cold, settling rage. He's not even pretending to play fair anymore. We'll get you new ingredients. I'll ride to Red Creek myself. There's no time. The competition starts at 8 tomorrow morning. Red Creek is 3 hours each way, and that's if they have what I need in stock. She stood, brushing off her skirt with trembling hands. I have to work with what's left. Which is? Basics. Flour, sugar, eggs, milk, salt pork instead of good beef, local apples instead of imported lemons. Everything I planned is impossible now. She expected him to tell her to withdraw, to say it wasn't worth the humiliation of competing with inferior ingredients. Instead, he smiled. Then don't cook what you planned. Cook what you know. What? You've been trying to impress them with fancy ingredients and complicated techniques. But that's not who you are. You're the woman who makes miracles with whatever's on hand, who turned my disaster kitchen into something that feeds men so well they forget to complain. Who can take basics and make them sing? He moved closer. Cook that food, the kind that tells them exactly who you are. Ria looked at the meager supplies remaining, then back at Calder. Slowly, an idea began to form. I need my mother's recipe book, and I need the men to trust me. You have both. She worked through the night, not fighting the theft, but using it. She made bread from scratch, the kind her mother had taught her in a mining camp kitchen. She slow-cooked the salt pork until it fell apart, creating a stew that could warm you from the inside out. She made an apple pie using a technique learned from an Oregon logger's wife, with a crust that would shatter at the touch of a fork. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't sophisticated, but it was honest, and it was hers. The men woke at dawn to find her loading supplies into a wagon, her face set with determination. We're coming with you, Hank announced. You don't have to. We know we don't have to, we want to. He looked at the others. All of us. You're representing this ranch, and we stand with you." So they arrived at the county fairgrounds as a group. Rhea in the wagon seat beside Calder, 10 ranch hands riding behind like an honor guard, their presence a statement that couldn't be ignored. The fairgrounds were chaos. Dozens of contestants bustling between cook stations, judges conferring in tight groups, spectators already gathering despite the early hour. Rhea found her assigned station and began unpacking her supplies, acutely aware of the stares and whispers following her every movement. Is that the one Hendrik was complaining about? Look at the size of her. How does she even reach the stove? I heard she's been living in improper circumstances with all those men. Rhea kept her head down and her hands moving. The comments weren't new. They'd followed her everywhere she'd ever worked. But today, they felt sharper, more pointed. A woman at the next station leaned over, her voice falsely sweet. "First time competing, dear? Don't worry if you don't win. Not everyone has the refinement for this level of cooking." Rhea met her eyes. "I'll keep that in mind." The woman's smile froze. She'd expected embarrassment, submission. Instead, she got cool assessment and dismissal. The head judge called for attention, explaining the rules. 2 rounds, savory and sweet, with 4 hours for each. Contestants would be judged on technical execution, presentation, and taste. The winner would be announced at the evening ceremony. "Competitors, take your stations. Round 1 begins now." Rhea lit her stove and began to cook. She worked with the focused intensity that came from years of professional kitchens, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind stayed sharp and calculating. Around her, other contestants created elaborate displays, delicate sauces, precisely arranged garnishes, towers of culinary ambition. Rhea made stew and bread, but she made them the way her mother had taught her, with patience and attention and the kind of love that couldn't be taught. She coaxed flavor from simple ingredients, built layers of taste that would unfold on the tongue, created texture that ranged from the crisp crust of bread to the melt-in-your-mouth tenderness of slow-cooked meat. The judges made their rounds, tasting at each station with expressions of professional neutrality. When they reached Rhea's table, she saw the head judge, a stern woman from San Francisco, pause at the sight of her simple presentation. "This is your entry?" "Yes, ma'am." The woman took a small portion of stew, a piece of bread. Tasted. Her expression didn't change, but Rhea saw her take a second bite. Then a third. "Interesting," was all she said before moving to the next station. During the break between rounds, Rhea found herself surrounded by the ranch hands. "How'd it go?" Charlie asked. "Can't tell. The judges don't give anything away." "The people watching sure had opinions," Hank said darkly. "Heard plenty of comments about uppity women and inappropriate displays." "Let them talk. Easy to say, harder to live with." "I've been living with it for 32 years. Rhea straightened her apron. "I'm not stopping now." The afternoon round brought more challenges. Rhea's apple pie emerged from the oven with a crack in the top crust, a minor flaw that she knew could cost her points. But when she tasted a piece from the edge, the filling was perfect, sweet and tart and spiced just right, the crust flaky and buttery. It would have to be enough. At the station beside her, a young woman who'd been kind earlier looked over at Rhea's pie with open envy. "That smells incredible." "Thank you." "I mean it. I've been competing in these for 5 years, and I've never gotten a pie crust like that." She lowered her voice. "Don't let them get to you. Some of these people, they wouldn't recognize real talent if it bit them." "You think I have real talent?" "I think you're the only person here cooking with your whole heart instead of just your ego." The woman extended a flour-dusted hand. "I'm Margaret Chen. My family runs the restaurant in Red Creek." "Rhea Callan." "I know. Everyone knows." Margaret smiled. "Some of us think it's about time someone shook things up around here." The judges completed their final round of tasting. Then came the wait. 3 hours while they deliberated and the fairgrounds filled with people arriving for the evening ceremony and announcement. Rhea retreated to the wagon, suddenly exhausted. Calder found her there, sitting on the tailgate and staring at nothing. "Whatever happens," he said, "you did something remarkable today." "I made stew and pie." "You made food that mattered. I watched people taste it, watched their faces change. You told them a story with that meal, whether they wanted to hear it or not. And if they didn't listen, Then they're fools, and their opinion doesn't count. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. But I think they listened. I think you scared them a little. Good. They sat in comfortable silence until the announcement bell rang, calling competitors and spectators to the judging pavilion. The crowd was massive. Seemed like half the county had turned out. Rhea spotted Hendrik in the front row, his expression smug. Eleanor sat nearby, her face carefully neutral. The ranch hands clustered together, a wall of support in worn work clothes. The head judge took the stage, her face still professionally blank. This year's competition featured exceptional talent across all categories. The judges faced difficult decisions, particularly in the final rounds. Our third-place winner is Mrs. Sarah Pritchard of Ashford for her roasted pheasant and lemon custard. Polite applause. A middle-aged woman in expensive dress climbed the stage to accept her ribbon. Second place goes to Miss Margaret Chen of Red Creek for her Szechuan beef and almond cookies. Louder applause. Margaret accepted her ribbon with a gracious smile, but Rhea saw her glance toward the remaining contestants, specifically toward Rhea. And first place. The judge paused, and in that pause, Rhea heard everything. The weight of decision, the knowledge of controversy, the choice to stand by judgment rather than politics. First place goes to Miss Rhea Callan of Voss Ranch for her beef stew, sourdough bread, and meat dough bread and apple pie. For a moment, silence. Then the ranch hands erupted in cheers so loud they drowned out everything else. Rhea stood frozen, unable to process that she'd heard her own name. Calder's hand found her elbow. Go. Get your ribbon. She walked to the stage on legs that didn't feel quite solid. The head judge handed her the blue ribbon and the prize purse, her expression finally softening. Your stew, the judge said quietly, reminded me of my grandmother's cooking. She came west in a covered wagon and fed miners for 40 years. The best food I've ever eaten came from her kitchen. She paused. You have that same gift. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Thank you. Don't thank me. You earned this. As Rhea turned to leave the stage, she saw Hendrik's face, purple with rage, his hands clenched into fists. She saw Eleanor's brilliant smile. She saw her ranch hands whooping and celebrating like she'd won a war. And maybe she had. But the real battle started when she stepped off that stage. Hendrik was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, blocking her path. This is a travesty, an absolute travesty. It's a cooking competition, and I won. You won because Eleanor Ashford pulled strings, because she threatened the judges with her political connections. Or I won because my food was better. Rhea met his eyes without flinching. I know that's hard for you to accept, that someone you've written off as worthless might actually have value, but your opinion doesn't change reality. You think this changes anything? You're still exactly what you were, an improper woman in an improper situation, and this town won't forget that. Good. I don't want them to forget. I want them to remember that they tried to erase me, and I won anyway. The crowd had gone silent, watching the confrontation with hungry attention. Hendrik stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss meant only for her ears. You're going to regret this. I'll make sure that ranch fails. I'll make sure Voss loses everything. And when he's broken and desperate, I'll make sure he knows it was because of you. Before Rhea could respond, Calder was there, moving between them with dangerous calm. Threatening people now, Marcus? In front of witnesses? I don't make threats. I make promises. Then let me make one too. You come after my ranch, my people, or Rhea again, and I'll take every dirty deal you've ever made and spread it across every newspaper from here to Sacramento, starting with that land fraud case from 3 years ago that you paid the county clerk to bury. Hendrik's face went from purple to white. You're bluffing. Am I? Ask yourself if you want to find out. Calder's voice was quiet, but lethal. Leave us alone, Marcus. Move on to someone else to bully, because this fight, you've already lost it. For a long moment, the two men faced each other. Then Hendrik turned and stalked away, shoving through the crowd with barely contained fury. The crowd burst into conversation, voices overlapping in excitement and shock. Eleanor appeared at Rhea's elbow. That was magnificently done, both the cooking and the confrontation. I think I just made everything worse. On the contrary, you made everything clear. Hendrik overplayed his hand. Everyone saw him threaten you publicly. Whatever moral high ground he thought he had, it's gone now. She squeezed Ria's arm. You did more than win a competition today. You changed the narrative. The celebration that night at the ranch was raucous. The hands had stopped for supplies on the way home, and Hank produced a bottle of whiskey that was probably too good for the occasion, but perfect anyway. Someone played harmonica. Charlie attempted a jig that mostly involved falling over. Even Calder smiled, really smiled, the kind of expression that transformed his whole face. Ria sat on the porch steps, blue ribbon in her lap, watching the men celebrate with a warmth in her chest that she couldn't quite name. Margaret Chen's words kept echoing in her mind. Cooking with your whole heart instead of just your ego. That's what she'd done today. That's what she'd been doing since she arrived at this ranch. Not trying to prove she was someone else, but fully embodying who she already was. Calder sat down beside her, 2 tin cups in his hands. He offered her one. To victory, he said. To survival, she countered. They drank, and the cheap whiskey burned all the way down. You know Hendrik meant what he said, Calder said after a moment. About coming after the ranch. I know. We could still avoid it. You could take your prize money and head somewhere new, somewhere without all this history and hate. Ria looked at him. Is that what you want? No, but I don't want you to suffer for my fights. They're my fights too now. She turned the ribbon over in her hands. I've spent my whole life running from places that didn't want me. I'm done running. If Hendrik wants a war, I'll give him one. You sound awfully confident for someone who just started a fight with the most powerful man in the county. I beat him today. I'll beat him again. It won't be a cooking competition next time. I know. She met his eyes. But I won't be alone either. That's the difference. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Ria looked up to see storm clouds building over the mountains. The men began moving indoors, gathering equipment, securing anything that might blow away. Storm's coming, Hank observed. Might be a bad one. He had no idea how right he was. The storm that had been threatening broke 3 days after the competition with a violence that seemed almost personal. Rain came in sheets so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead, wind that tore shingles off the barn roof, and lightning that turned night into stuttering daylight. Ria woke to chaos at 2 a.m, men shouting, horses screaming, and underneath it all, a rumble that wasn't thunder. She threw on clothes and ran outside into the deluge. Calder was already in the yard, rain plastering his hair to his skull, yelling orders that got lost in the wind. What's happening? She shouted. Stampede! Lightning spooked the herd! He grabbed her shoulders. Get back inside, it's not safe. But even as he said it, she could see the problem. The cattle were running blind through the storm, heading straight for the creek that was already swollen with runoff. If they hit that water at full speed, half the herd would drown and the rest would scatter across 3 counties. The hands were saddling horses with frantic speed, but Ria could count. 10 men against 300 head of panicked cattle in a storm that made visibility nearly impossible. You need more riders, she said. We don't have more riders. You have me. Ria, no. I grew up around cattle. I can ride. It was half true. She'd worked a ranch kitchen in Wyoming and picked up the basics out of boredom. But she could sit a horse, and she could follow orders, which was more than nothing. This isn't a gentle trail ride. This is, I know what it is, and I know you need every person who can help. She was already moving toward the barn. You can yell at me later. Right now, saddle me a horse. For a split second, she thought he'd refuse. Then lightning cracked overhead, and another scream came from the herd, and Calder made his choice. Charlie, get her on Rosie. Not the mare, the gelding. He's steady in chaos. 5 minutes later, Ria was mounted on a stocky bay horse with a no-nonsense disposition, following Calder and the hands into the storm. The rain was so heavy she could barely breathe, each drop hitting like a small stone. The world had contracted to the horse beneath her, the vague shapes of riders ahead, and the thunder of hooves that grew louder with each second. Then she saw them, a seething mass of cattle, eyes rolling white with terror, running like the storm itself had taken form. They were heading for the creek at a dead run, and from the sound of rushing water the creek was already a torrent. Split formation, Calder's voice barely carried. Turn the leaders. Turn them or we lose everything. The riders fanned out, trying to get ahead of the stampede. Ria found herself on the far right flank with Hank, riding parallel to the herd and trying to angle inward to redirect them. Her horse moved with surprising confidence, responding to her inexpert guidance with the patience of an animal who'd done this before. "Stay wide," Hank shouted. "Don't get too close or they'll run you over." She nodded, focusing everything on keeping her seat and not falling. The cattle were massive shapes in the darkness, their panic infectious. She could smell their fear, hear the desperate bawling mixing with thunder. Ahead, she saw Calder and two others trying to turn the lead steers away from the creek. They were gaining ground, slowly forcing the herd to curve, but it wasn't enough. The back half was still driving forward, pushing the front toward the water. Then everything went wrong at once. One of the lead steers broke left instead of right, crashing into Calder's horse. The horse stumbled, Calder went flying, and suddenly he was on the ground in front of 300 stampeding cattle. Rhea didn't think. She kicked her horse into a gallop, racing toward where Calder had fallen. She could see him trying to get up, see him slip in the mud, see the wall of cattle bearing down on him. She reached him with seconds to spare, leaning down from the saddle. "Grab my hand." He looked up, saw her, and for a moment she thought he'd refuse on principle. Then survival instinct kicked in and he grabbed her wrist with both hands. Rhea had never pulled anything heavier than a sack of flour from horseback. Calder was 180 pounds of dead weight, and her shoulders screamed as she hauled him up. He got one foot in her stirrup, then swung up behind her, and she felt the horse stagger under the double load. "Go!" Calder shouted. "Get clear!" She wheeled the horse hard right, away from the stampede, and felt the rush of air as the herd thundered past where Calder had been lying seconds before. Her horse carried them to the edge of the chaos, then stopped, sides heaving. Calder slid off, and Rhea expected him to run back into the fray. Instead, he reached up and pulled her down from the saddle, his hands iron tight on her waist. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen," he said, rain streaming down his face. "You're welcome. If you'd fallen, if that horse had stumbled, but I didn't, and he didn't." She was shaking, adrenaline making her reckless. "Now get back out there and save your cattle." He stared at her for one more second, then did something she didn't expect. He kissed her, hard and quick, and tasting of rain and fear and something desperate. Then he was gone, running toward one of the riderless horses, leaving Rhea standing in the storm with her heart hammering and her lips burning. She remounted and rode back into the chaos. The next hour was a blur of mud and noise and exhaustion. Slowly, impossibly, the riders managed to turn the herd away from the creek. The cattle circled, their panic burning out into confusion, and finally stopped in a milling mass that was terrified but no longer running. By the time the storm passed and dawn broke gray and sullen over the ranch, every person and animal was soaked to the bone and shaking with fatigue. The hands did a quick count. They'd lost maybe 20 head to the creek or scatter, which was a miracle considering how close they'd come to losing everything. Rhea dismounted on legs that barely held her and led her horse back to the barn. Her clothes were plastered to her body, her hair a disaster, her hands blistered from gripping the reins. She'd never been so tired in her life. Calder found her in the barn, struggling to unsaddle her horse. "Let me." He took over, his movements efficient despite his own exhaustion. "You should get dry, change clothes." "So should you." "I will." He finished with the saddle and turned to face her. "About what happened out there? You mean the part where I saved your life, or the part where you kissed me?" "Both, either." He ran a hand through his wet hair. "I was out of line with the kiss. You work for me, and I had no right." "Calder." She waited until he looked at her. "Did you mean it? The kiss?" "Yes, He stopped, seeming to struggle with honesty. "Yes, I meant it. I've wanted to do that for weeks, and when I thought I was about to die and you came riding out of nowhere like some kind of avenging angel..." He broke off. "But that doesn't make it appropriate. You're in my employ, you're dependent on this job, and I just put you in an impossible position." "What if I told you it's not impossible?" "Rhea, what if I told you I wanted you to kiss me again?" The barn went very quiet. Even the horses seemed to be holding their breath. "You don't know what you're saying. You've been through trauma tonight. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly." She moved closer, aware of how she must look, bedraggled and mud-covered and probably half drowned. "I know exactly what I'm saying. And if you're going to reject me, at least have the honesty to tell me it's because you don't want me, not because you're trying to protect my dignity. Not want you? He laughed, the sound harsh. Rhea, I think about you constantly. The way you move through the kitchen, the way you stand up to people who try to diminish you, the way you risked your neck tonight for cattle you have no stake in. He stepped closer, and she could see the war happening in his expression. But wanting you and acting on it are different things. If we do this, if we become something, the town will crucify us. They already think the worst. This would confirm everything they suspect. I don't care what they think. You should. It'll make your life harder. My life is already hard. At least this way, I'd have something worth fighting for. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with a gentleness that made her breath catch. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He kissed her again, slower this time, and Rhea felt something inside her that had been locked tight for years begin to open. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Calder rested his forehead against hers. This is going to get complicated, he said. Everything worth having is complicated. The men are going to have opinions. Let them. Eleanor is going to give us that knowing smile. She's earned it. He laughed, really laughed, and pulled her close. They stood there in the barn as the sun rose over the ranch, two exhausted people who'd found something unexpected in the middle of chaos. The celebration of survival was short-lived. By mid-morning, 3 more ranch hands rode out, citing family concerns and better opportunities elsewhere. Rhea watched them go from the kitchen window, her jaw tight. That makes 5 in 2 weeks, Hank said, coming in for coffee. We're down to 7 hands now, and we need at least 10 to keep the operation running properly. Can we hire replacements? From where? Every man in the county knows working here means social suicide in Ashford. The only ones left are the ones who don't have anywhere else to go, like me and the boys. Rhea poured him coffee, her mind working. What if we hired from outside the county? Red Creek, maybe, or farther out? Travel costs money, and even if we find people willing to come, Hendrik will find a way to poison them against us. Hank took a long drink. I hate to say it, but the man's winning, slow and steady. He's bleeding us dry. After Hank left, Rhea found Calder in his office, surrounded by ledgers that clearly weren't telling him anything good. How bad is it? She asked. He didn't try to lie. Bad. Between losing cattle in the stampede, paying premium prices for supplies that used to come from Ashford, and losing workers who I have to replace with higher wages to attract outsiders, we're in trouble. We can last maybe 3 more months before I have to start selling off land or livestock. And if you sell, then Hendrik buys it at bottom dollar, and we spiral downward until there's nothing left. He closed the ledger with more force than necessary. I'm not giving him the satisfaction. What are our options? Hope the situation changes. Find a miracle, or... He stopped. Or what? Marry someone with resources who could shore up the ranch finances. Someone from a good family that Hendrik couldn't easily target. His expression was carefully neutral. Eleanor's been hinting at it for weeks. There are a few widows in the county who'd consider it. Rhea felt something cold settle in her stomach. That's very practical. It's also never going to happen. He stood and moved around the desk. I did the practical marriage once. Married young to a girl my parents chose because our family's land adjoined. It was a disaster until she died and I was free to marry Sarah. I'm not doing that again. Even to save the ranch? Even then. He took her hand. We'll find another way. But the way found them 3 days later, and it wasn't what anyone expected. Rhea was preparing lunch when Eleanor Ashford arrived with a man Rhea didn't recognize, tall and expensively dressed with the bearing of someone used to being important. Miss Callan, this is Mr. James Crawford from the Denver Cattlemen's Association, Eleanor said. He's been touring ranches in the territory, and I thought he should see yours. Crawford had sharp eyes that took in everything. He watched Rhea work through lunch preparation, observed how she organized the kitchen, noted the easy interaction between her and the ranch hands when they came in to eat. Mrs. Ashford tells me you won the county fair cooking competition, he said. I did. Against significant opposition, I understand. You could say that. She's being modest, Eleanor interjected. She faced theft, sabotage, and outright hostility, and still produce the best food anyone had tasted in years. Crawford smiled slightly. I'm less interested in the competition and more interested in your daily operation here. How many men do you feed? 7 hands plus Mr. Voss. Used to be 12, but we've had staff reductions. Due to? Local politics. Rhea met his gaze steadily. Some people don't approve of the ranch's hiring practices. Meaning they don't approve of you. That's correct. And yet you stayed. I had nowhere else to go at first. Now I stay because I choose to. Crawford nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Eleanor. I'd like to speak with Mr. Voss, if he's available. The meeting that followed happened in the ranch office, but Rhea could hear raised voices through the door. Not angry, animated. When Calder emerged 2 hours later, his expression was carefully controlled, but his eyes were bright. What happened? Rhea asked. Crawford represents a consortium of ranchers looking to establish a new cattle shipping point. They need a central ranch with good water, accessible trails, and this is the important part, a reputation for integrity that makes them trustworthy as a hub. He paused. He wants to make us that hub. What does that mean? It means steady contracts, regular business from multiple ranches, enough guaranteed income to weather any boycott Hendrik can throw at us. His voice was careful. But there's a catch. There always is. The consortium needs assurance of stability. Crawford was impressed by the ranch, by the operation, by... He stopped. By you, actually. He said any establishment that could attract and keep a cook of your caliber, despite active hostility, showed the kind of backbone they're looking for. So what's the catch? They need the deal finalized within a month. That means immediate improvements to the facilities, new bunkhouse, expanded corrals, better water infrastructure. It means capital we don't have. Rhea's mind raced. How much? $2,000? Maybe more. Her prize money from the competition was $200. A fortune by her standards, but nowhere near enough. What if we pooled resources? The hands, me, anyone who has savings. I already asked. Even if everyone contributed every penny, we'd have maybe $500. Calder's frustration was visible. We're so close to a solution, and we can't reach it. That night, Rhea lay awake in her small room thinking. $2,000 might as well be $1 million for people like them. But somewhere in her memory, something nagged. A comment Eleanor had made weeks ago about land and influence. The next morning, she rode into town alone, ignoring Calder's warnings. She found Eleanor at her house, a grand Victorian on the hill overlooking Ashford. I need your help, Rhea said without preamble, and I need your honesty about whether you're willing to give it. Eleanor invited her in, served tea that Rhea barely tasted, and listened without interruption as Rhea explained the situation. So you need $2,000, Eleanor said when she finished. I need a loan. From you. To be repaid with interest once the consortium contracts start generating income. Rhea set down her teacup. I know it's a lot to ask. I know I have no collateral except my word, but I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. You're not desperate. Calder is. Eleanor's eyes were shrewd. You're in love with him. It wasn't a question, but Rhea answered anyway. Yes. And he with you? Yes? That's going to make your life very difficult. I know. Eleanor stood and walked to the window, looking out over the town her husband had built. My late husband believed in backing people of character over people of pedigree. It's why he left me the resources to make my own decisions without needing anyone's approval. She turned back to Rhea. I'll give you the money. Not as a loan, as an investment. I want 10% of the consortium contracts for 5 years. That's more than fair. That's generous. It's also strategic. Hendrik has been trying to control cattle shipping in this county for years. This consortium deal breaks his monopoly. Eleanor smiled. Sometimes doing good and doing well align perfectly. Mrs. Ashford, Eleanor, I don't know what to say. Say you'll invite me to the wedding when you finally stop pretending you're just employer and employee. Rhea felt her face heat. It's complicated. It always is. Eleanor rang for her butler. Now, let's draft the paperwork before Marcus Hendrik hears about this and tries to interfere. The money arrived at the ranch 3 days later, delivered by Eleanor's lawyer with contracts that made everything official. Calder stared at the bank draft like it might disappear if he looked away. She just gave us this? With 10% interest? 10% of contracts, not interest, Rhea corrected. It's an investment, not charity. It's salvation. He set down the draft carefully. With this, we can finalize Crawford's deal. We can hire proper workers. We can... He stopped, looking at her with an expression that made her heart skip. You did this. Eleanor did this. You asked. You put aside pride and asked for help when I was too stubborn to consider it. He moved around the desk and pulled her into his arms. You saved this ranch. Again. We saved it. Together. He kissed her, and this time there was no hesitation, no questioning whether it was appropriate. This was choice, clear and uncomplicated. When they finally broke apart, Hank was standing in the doorway, grinning. About damn time, he said. The boys have had a betting pool going for weeks about when you two would finally admit it. How much did you win? Calder asked. $20. Charlie had this week, but I had right after a crisis, which is close enough. He tipped his hat to Rhea. Ma'am, the men want you to know that we approve, in case that matters. It matters, Rhea said, her voice thick. Good. Now, boss, about those facility improvements Crawford wants? The next 3 weeks were controlled chaos. Workers arrived from Red Creek and beyond, drawn by decent wages and the promise of steady work. The new bunkhouse went up with surprising speed. Corrals expanded, infrastructure improved. The ranch transformed from struggling to thriving right before their eyes. And through it all, Hendrik watched from town, his fury evident to anyone who cared to look. The attack came on a Tuesday evening, just as the sun was setting and the workers were finishing dinner. Rhea was in the kitchen cleaning up when she heard horses approaching fast. Too many horses. Moving with purpose. She ran to the window and saw them, 20 men from town, Hendrik at the lead, riding through the gate like an invading army. They carried torches despite the daylight, and their faces were set with righteous anger. Calder met them in the yard, the ranch hands forming up behind him. Rhea grabbed her heavy iron skillet, not much of a weapon, but better than nothing, and moved to the door. You're trespassing, Calder said, his voice carrying across the yard. We're concerned citizens, Hendrik announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Here to address a moral danger to this community. What moral danger would that be? You, this ranch. The woman you've brought here to corrupt decent men and spit in the face of everything this town stands for. Hendrik pointed at the house. We know what's happening here, the impropriety, the sin, and we're here to put a stop to it. By doing what exactly? Burning us out? Calder's hand rested on his hip, near where Rhea knew he kept a pistol, because that's what those torches suggest. We're here to make you an offer. Sell the ranch, leave the county, take your whore with you, and we'll let you go in peace. The word hit Rhea like a slap. She saw Calder's whole body go rigid. You want to repeat that? Calder's voice was deadly quiet. You heard me. She's a whore, and you're a fool, and this whole establishment is a stain on... He didn't finish. Calder moved faster than Rhea had ever seen anyone move, crossing the distance between them and dragging Hendrik off his horse before the man could react. They hit the ground hard, and Calder's fist connected with Hendrik's face with a crack that made Rhea wince. Chaos erupted. Men from town surged forward. Ranch hands met them. In seconds, the yard was a brawl, fists flying, men shouting, horses screaming and dancing away from the violence. Rhea ran into the fray without thinking, her skillet raised. She saw one of Hendrik's men trying to pull a knife on Charlie and swung hard, connecting with the man's shoulder. He yelped and dropped the knife, stumbling back. Stay down, she snarled. Then someone grabbed her from behind, arms pinning hers. She struggled, but the grip was iron tight. Let her go! Calder's voice raw with fury. Make me! Hendrik had recovered, his face bloody but his eyes wild. You want to protect her? Fine. Let's see how you do it when this whole place is ashes. He gestured to his men, and Rhea saw one of them raise his torch toward the new bunkhouse. A gunshot cracked through the air. Everyone froze. Eleanor Ashford sat on her horse at the edge of the property, a small pistol in her hand pointed at the sky. Behind her were a dozen men, workers from her own properties, armed and ready. That's enough, she said, her voice carrying. Marcus? Unless you want me to ride to the county seat tomorrow and present the sheriff with a full accounting of your attempted arson and assault, I suggest you leave. Now. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Eleanor's expression was ice. I've been collecting evidence of your corruption for years. Land fraud, intimidation, bribery. All documented. All ready to present to the territorial governor if necessary. The only reason I haven't is because I was hoping you'd give me a reason that would make it satisfying. She smiled, cold and sharp. You just did. Hendricks' face went from rage to something closer to fear. You're bluffing. Am I? She gestured to one of her men, who produced a thick envelope. This contains copies of every illegal deed transfer you've made in the last 5 years. Sworn testimonies from men you've threatened. Financial records showing your embezzlement from the town coffers. She paused. Shall I continue? The silence stretched. Then, slowly, Hendricks' men began backing away. The man holding Rhea released her, stepping back with his hands raised. Hendrick himself stood there, fists clenched, his whole body shaking with impotent rage. This isn't over. Yes, Eleanor said calmly. It is. Leave. Don't come back. And if I hear of any further harassment of this ranch or its people, those documents go public. Clear? For a long moment, Hendrick just stared at her. Then he turned, mounted his horse with jerky movements, and rode out without another word. His men followed, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. As the dust settled, Eleanor dismounted and approached the group. Is anyone seriously hurt? Nothing that won't heal, Calder said, wiping blood from his split knuckle. You have good timing. I've been watching the ranch since I made my investment. I know how men like Hendrick think. When he realized he'd lost the business fight, violence was inevitable. She looked around at the assembled ranch hands and her own men. I brought backup just in case. You brought an army, Hank said admiringly. I brought witnesses. If Hendrick had succeeded tonight, there'd be no way to claim it was an accident. She turned to Rhea. Are you all right, my dear? Rhea nodded, still shaking from adrenaline. Thank you. For everything. Thank me by living well. That's the best revenge against small-minded people. After Eleanor and her men left, promising to stay alert for any further trouble, the ranch hands dispersed to check for damage and tend to injuries. Rhea found herself alone with Calder in the gathering darkness. He touched her face gently, his eyes searching hers. Are you really all right? Just shaken. You? Furious. The things he said. Calder's jaw tightened. No one talks about you like that. No one. He already has. They all have. Words are just words. Not when they're designed to destroy. He pulled her close, and she felt him trembling with leftover rage and fear. When I saw him grab you, when I thought, I'm fine. We're all fine. This time. But Eleanor's right. Violence was always coming, and it might come again. Then we'll face it again. Rhea looked up at him. I meant what I said before. I'm not leaving. Whatever comes, we face it together. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth. Together, he agreed. They stood there in the dark, two people who'd found each other in the middle of a war neither of them had started, but both were determined to finish. The morning after Hendrick's failed attack, Rhea woke to find the ranch transformed. Not physically, though there were still scorch marks on the ground where torches had been dropped, but in atmosphere. The men moved differently, spoke differently. There was a hardness now, a unity forged in conflict. Charlie found her in the kitchen before breakfast, his eye blackened but his expression determined. Miss Rhea, the boys and I talked last night. We want you to know something. What's that? We're not going anywhere. Not for better wages, not for easier work, not because some town decides we're not respectable enough. He straightened his shoulders. This ranch, it's ours now. We built it up together, and we're going to defend it together. Rhea felt her throat tighten. Charlie? And we talked about something else, too. He glanced toward the door, then back at her. About you and Mr. Voss? We know. We're not blind, and we want you to know that we think it's right. You two belong together. The town won't see it that way. The town can go to hell. He flushed. Sorry, ma'am, but it's true. They don't get to decide who deserves happiness and who doesn't. After he left, Rhea stood at the counter, her mother's recipe book open in front of her. She'd been searching for a recipe for apple cobbler, but found herself reading the margins instead. Her mother's handwriting, faded but still legible, spoke across the years. Sometimes the world will try to make you small. Cook anyway. Feed people anyway. Love anyway. The trying is what matters. Ria traced the words with her finger, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. The rejections, the struggles, the doors that had closed. And then this place where doors had opened not because she'd changed herself, but because someone had finally seen her clearly. Calder found her there an hour later, still staring at the book. "You all right?" "Just thinking. About how far we've come, about how far we still have to go." She closed the book gently. "Hendrik's not done. Eleanor scared him off, but men like him don't stay scared. They regroup." "I know." Calder moved to stand beside her. "But we're ready now. We have the consortium deal. We have Eleanor's backing. We have a crew that's committed." He paused. "And we have each other." "Is that enough?" "It's more than I've had in years. More than I thought I'd have again." He took her hand. "Ria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "All right. Do you want this? Not just the ranch? Not just the work? But me. Us. A life together knowing it means fighting this battle every day." She looked at their joined hands, his calloused and scarred from years of hard labor, hers stained with flour and marked by knife cuts that had healed crooked. Imperfect hands that fit together perfectly. "I spent 32 years trying to make myself acceptable to people who would never accept me," she said slowly. "Trying to be smaller, quieter, less, and I was miserable. Here, with you, I don't have to try. I can just be." She met his eyes. "So yes, I want this. I want you. I want us, whatever that costs. It's going to cost plenty. Then we'll pay it." He kissed her, soft and slow, a promise more than a passion. When they broke apart, he was smiling, really smiling, the kind that reached his eyes and changed his whole face. "Marry me." Ria blinked. "What?" "Marry me. Not because it's practical or proper or because the town expects it. Marry me because I love you and I want to spend whatever time we have fighting beside you." "Calder, I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but Sarah taught me that life's too short to waste time pretending you don't want what you want." His grip on her hand tightened. "I want you. As my wife, my partner, the person who stands with me when everything goes to hell. So marry me." Ria felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. You stubborn, wonderful, impossible man. Yes." He swept her up, laughing, and she laughed too, and for a moment the weight of everything they'd been carrying lifted. Then Hank cleared his throat from the doorway. "Boss, we got a problem." They found the town delegation waiting at the ranch gate. Not Hendrik this time, but the mayor, 2 council members, and Sheriff Morton. Their faces were somber, official. "Mr. Voss," the mayor began, his tone carefully neutral. "We've come on behalf of the county." "What does the county want?" "To make amends." The mayor shifted uncomfortably. "After yesterday's incident, certain facts have come to light. Mr. Hendrik has been asked to resign from the council pending an investigation into financial irregularities." Calder's expression didn't change. And the council wishes to extend an olive branch. We recognize that Voss Ranch has been unfairly targeted. We'd like to restore normal business relations, end the boycott, offer official apologies." "Why now? What changed?" The mayor glanced at the sheriff, who took over. "Mrs. Ashford made good on her threat, sent copies of her evidence to the territorial governor. There's going to be an official inquiry. Hendrik's going down, and anyone associated with his schemes is scrambling to distance themselves. So you're not here because you suddenly grew a conscience. You're here because you're scared." "We're here because it's the right thing to do," the mayor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The right thing would have been not targeting us in the first place." Calder crossed his arms. "What exactly are you offering?" "Full restoration of business privileges. A formal apology to be printed in the county newspaper, and a council seat if you want it, a voice in local government." "And what do you want in return?" "Your silence. No lawsuits, no public accusations, no dragging Ashford's reputation through the mud." The mayor's expression hardened slightly. We clean this up quietly. Everyone moves forward. Rhea watched Calder's face, saw him weighing options. The practical part of her understood the temptation. Take the deal, end the fight, get back to normal life. But another part, the part that had been fighting for dignity her whole life, rebelled against it. No, Calder said finally. No? I'll accept the restoration of business relations. I'll accept the apology. But I'm not giving you silence. He stepped forward. You want to move forward? Fine. But you're going to acknowledge publicly what happened here. You're going to admit that this ranch was targeted because of prejudice and corruption. You're going to name names and take responsibility. That's political suicide for half the council. Then maybe half the council needs to resign. Calder's voice was steel. I'm done protecting people who tried to destroy me. You want peace? You pay for it with truth. The mayor's face reddened. You're making a mistake. I've made plenty of mistakes. This isn't one of them. After the delegation left, angry and empty-handed, Rhea found Calder in the barn. That was risky, she said. I know. They could retaliate. They could try. He looked at her. But Eleanor has them cornered. They need this to go away quietly more than we need their approval. We have leverage now. And if they don't give in? Then we fight, like we've been fighting. He pulled her close. I meant what I said about truth mattering. I'm tired of hiding, tired of apologizing for who I am and who I love. If they want peace, they can have it, but not at the cost of our dignity. 3 days later, the newspaper arrived with a front-page editorial. Not a small apology buried in the back pages, but a full accounting signed by the mayor and remaining council members. It detailed the systematic harassment of Voss Ranch, acknowledged the role of prejudice in driving policy decisions, and announced Hendrick's resignation and pending criminal investigation. It wasn't perfect. The language was careful, legal, designed to minimize liability, but it was public, and it was damning. Eleanor arrived that afternoon with a bottle of expensive wine and a satisfied smile. You did it, she said. You actually made them admit fault. You did it, Calder corrected. Your evidence, your pressure. I provided ammunition. You two had the courage to use it. She looked between Calder and Rhea. I hear congratulations are in order? Rhea glanced at Calder. They hadn't made a public announcement yet, but of course Eleanor knew. We're getting married, Calder confirmed. About time. When? We haven't set a date yet. Make it soon, before they have time to manufacture new objections. Eleanor's expression softened. And for what it's worth, I think Sarah would approve. She always said you needed someone who wouldn't back down from a fight. The wedding happened 2 weeks later, small and private. Eleanor stood witness. The ranch hands attended in their Sunday best, which for most of them meant clean shirts and unsuccessful attempts to tame their hair. Charlie played fiddle music that was enthusiastic, if not entirely on key. The county clerk who performed the ceremony was nervous, clearly aware of the political implications, but he did his job professionally. When he pronounced them married, the hands cheered loud enough to spook the horses. Rhea wore a simple blue dress that Eleanor had insisted on buying her, and Calder wore the same suit he'd worn to his wedding with Sarah, because he was practical and it still fit. They exchanged rings that Hank had helped Calder pick out in Red Creek, plain silver bands that felt substantial on Rhea's finger. You look beautiful, Calder said as they stood together after the ceremony. I look the same as I always do. I know, beautiful. He kissed her while the hands hooted and Eleanor smiled. That night, alone in the main house that was now officially theirs together, Calder asked the question Rhea had been expecting. Are you happy? She thought about it seriously, wanting to give him truth instead of easy platitudes. I'm terrified, I'm exhausted, I'm waiting for the next disaster to hit. She paused. But yes, I'm happy. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though it's hard, especially because it's hard. Easy things never felt like mine. This does. He pulled her close, and they stood there in the lamplight, two imperfect people who'd found each other in imperfect circumstances and decided that was enough. The consortium deal finalized a month after the wedding, bringing steady business and new workers. The ranch expanded carefully, sustainably, becoming known throughout the territory as a model operation. Crawford brought other ranchers to visit, pointing out the efficiency, the low turnover, the satisfied workforce. And always, he mentioned the food. Rhea's reputation spread beyond the county. Other ranches tried to poach her with increasingly absurd offers. She turned them all down, content where she was. But the biggest change came 6 months after the wedding, when Margaret Chen from Red Creek arrived at the ranch with a proposal. "I want to open a restaurant," she said over coffee in Rhea's kitchen. "A real one, not just the lunch counter at my family's general store. And I want you to help me plan the menu and train the staff." "I'm not a restaurateur." "No, but you're a cook who understands that food is more than just sustenance. You get what I'm trying to do." Margaret leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to leave the ranch. I'm asking you to consult. Come to Red Creek once a week. Teach me what you know. Help me build something that matters." Rhea looked at Calder, who'd been listening from the doorway. "It's your decision," he said. "I won't pretend I like the idea of you being gone even one day a week, but I also won't stand in your way." "What if I fail? What if I teach her everything wrong? Then you'll both learn from it." He smiled. "Besides, I've tasted your cooking. Trust me, you won't steer her wrong." So Rhea started consulting, riding to Red Creek every Tuesday to work with Margaret. The restaurant opened 6 months later to immediate success, becoming known for food that was honest and skillful and generous. Margaret insisted on calling it Callan's Table over Rhea's protests. "It's your recipes, your techniques, your philosophy," Margaret argued. "You deserve the credit." The recognition was strange, uncomfortable at first, then gradually something Rhea learned to accept. People traveled from other towns to eat at Callan's Table, and some of them made the journey to Voss Ranch afterward, wanting to meet the woman behind the food. Ashford watched all of this happen with mixed feelings. Some residents, particularly the older establishment, remained hostile, but others, younger people, new arrivals, those who'd never bought into Hendrick's poison, started visiting the ranch to buy beef or hire workers or simply satisfy their curiosity. Slowly, grudgingly, the relationship between town and ranch normalized. Not friendly, perhaps, but functional. Civil. Hendrick himself disappeared before his trial, reportedly fleeing to California. His property was seized and sold at auction. Eleanor bought his house and turned it into a boarding school for girls, which felt like poetic justice. 2 years after Rhea first stepped off that stagecoach, she stood in her kitchen, expanded now, modernized, but still fundamentally hers, preparing dinner for a crew of 15. The recipe book her mother had given her sat open on the counter, its pages more worn than ever. She'd added her own notes in the margins now, writing in the same careful hand her mother had used. Tips for high-altitude baking, adjustments for cast-iron cooking, small observations about life. "Never underestimate what you can build with people who see you clearly," she wrote. "Sometimes belonging isn't about finding the perfect place. It's about finding the place where you can be imperfect and still be enough." Calder came in from the day's work, kissed her cheek, and stole a piece of bread from the cooling rack like he did every evening. "How was town?" he asked. "Same as always. Mrs. Pritchard still won't speak to me, but her daughter asked for my pie recipe." Rhea smiled. "Progress, I suppose." "You don't need her approval." "I know, but it's nice when the world gets a little less hostile." She turned to face him. "Eleanor stopped by the restaurant today. She wants to fund an expansion, says Red Creek needs a proper hotel, and Callan's Table should be the restaurant." "What did you tell her?" "That I'd think about it, that I'd talk to you." She paused. "What do you think?" "I think you've already made up your mind." "Maybe, but I still want to hear what you think." He considered, his expression thoughtful. "I think you've spent your whole life being told you couldn't have things, that you weren't enough for success, recognition, opportunity. And I think every time you prove them wrong, you create space for other people to do the same." He pulled her close. "So if you want to expand, expand. I'll support you, always. Even if it means more time away from the ranch? Even then, this was never about keeping you small. It was about giving you room to grow." That night, lying in bed with Calder's arm around her and the sound of the ranch settling into sleep around them, Rhea thought about the journey that had brought her here. The stagecoach arrival, the rejections, the desperate walk into wilderness on a stranger's word. She thought about this first breakfast she'd cooked for suspicious men who'd become family, about Charlie's near death and recovery, about the competition and the storm and the moment she'd pulled Calder from the path of stampeding cattle. She thought about every time she'd been told she wasn't enough, and every time she'd decided to be herself anyway. Some people spent their lives trying to fit into spaces that were never built for them. Rhea had done that too, for years. But here, in this rough frontier ranch that had started as a last resort, she'd learned something different. Sometimes the answer wasn't to make yourself smaller. Sometimes it was to find people who had the vision to see you at full size and the courage to stand beside you while you took up all the space you needed. She'd arrived at this ranch unwanted, judged before she could speak, written off before she could prove herself. She'd stayed through boycotts and threats, through social ostracism and physical danger. She'd cooked and fought and loved and built something that mattered. And in the process, she'd become exactly who she was always meant to be. Not despite the struggle, but because of it. The ranch thrived. The restaurant expanded. Eleanor's investment paid off handsomely, which she celebrated by funding a library in Red Creek and a scholarship for girls pursuing education. Charlie eventually married a school teacher from Red Creek who loved that he could barely read but treated everyone with kindness. Hank became foreman, running the ranch operations with quiet competence. New workers came and stayed, drawn by fair wages and the knowledge that they'd be judged by their work rather than their appearance or background. Margaret's restaurant became legendary, and Rhea's consulting grew into something bigger, teaching other women to cook professionally, helping them start their own establishments, creating a network of support that spread across the territory. And through it all, Rhea cooked. She fed people. She taught them that food could be comfort and art and medicine and memory all at once. 3 years after the wedding, Eleanor arrived at the ranch with news. "The territorial governor wants to meet you," she announced without preamble. "Why?" "Because you've become somewhat famous. The cook who changed the frontier, the woman who stood up to corruption, the rags to riches story that people love." Eleanor smiled. "He wants to give you a commendation at the territorial celebration next month." Rhea felt panic rise. I can't. I don't do public speaking. I don't know how to be what they want." "Then don't be what they want. Be yourself." Eleanor's expression was kind, but firm. "Rhea, you've spent 3 years proving that being yourself is enough. Don't stop now, because the audience got bigger." The territorial celebration was overwhelming. Hundreds of people, speeches that went on forever, officials who wanted to shake her hand and have their picture taken with her. Rhea stood on the stage in her best dress. Still simple, still practical, but well-made now, and accepted a medal she didn't quite understand. But when the governor asked her to say a few words, she found herself speaking from the heart. "I'm not special," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "I'm a cook. That's all I've ever been. But cooking taught me something important. It taught me that value isn't about being perfect or fitting some ideal. It's about taking what you have, even if it's just basics, even if it's been judged as not enough, and making something nourishing from it." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some were friendly, some skeptical, some merely curious. "I came to this territory with nothing. I'd been turned away from every respectable place, told I wasn't good enough, pretty enough, worthy enough. And then I found people who looked past that and saw what I could do, who gave me a chance when I'd run out of chances." Her eyes found Calder in the crowd, found Eleanor, found the ranch hands who'd traveled to Red Creek for the ceremony. "We spend so much time telling people they're not enough. Too big, too small, too different, too much the same. We create these narrow definitions of acceptable, and then we're surprised when talented people slip through the cracks." She held up the medal. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been written off before they could prove themselves. Every person who's been told to make themselves smaller to fit into spaces that were never built for them." She took a breath, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. "You want to honor me? Don't give me medals. Change the way you see people. Judge them by what they can do, not how they look. Give chances to people who've run out of chances. Build spaces where everyone can be fully themselves instead of demanding they shrink to fit your comfort." The applause when she finished was thunderous. Though she suspected many people were clapping more from obligation than agreement, she didn't care. She had said what needed saying. Afterward, a young woman approached her, maybe 17, heavy-set and nervous. "Miss Callan, I wanted to thank you." For what? For saying what you said about not being enough. The girl's eyes were bright with tears. I want to learn to cook. I want to open a restaurant someday, but my family says I'm too big, that no one will take me seriously, that I should give up and just get married. Rhea took the girl's hands in hers. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. Well, Sarah Mitchell, let me tell you something. Your family is wrong. Your size has nothing to do with your ability to cook. And if you want to learn, I know a restaurant in Red Creek that's always looking for apprentices. She paused. But it's hard work, long hours, hot kitchens, people who'll judge you before you even start. Can you handle that? Yes, ma'am. I can handle anything if it means doing what I love. Rhea smiled. Then come to Callan's table next week. Ask for Margaret. Tell her I sent you. Watching Sarah walk away, her posture straighter and her expression hopeful, Rhea felt something settle in her chest. This was why it mattered. Not the medals or the recognition or the newspaper articles. This, one girl deciding she was enough, one life changed by someone refusing to accept the world's narrow definitions. That night, back in the ranch, Calder asked her the same question he'd asked on their wedding night. Are you happy? Rhea thought about it, looking around the home they'd built together. The expanded kitchen where she'd created thousands of meals, the bedroom where they'd learned each other, the land that had gone from struggling to thriving under their combined effort. I'm not sure happy is the right word, she said slowly. I'm satisfied. I'm fulfilled. I'm living a life that feels true. She leaned against him. Is that enough? More than enough. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. Two people who'd fought for the right to be exactly who they were and won. Years later, when people told the story of Rhea Callan, they'd focus on different things. The cooking competition, the confrontation with Hendrik, the restaurant expansion, the territorial commendation. But Rhea knew the real story was quieter. It was in the daily choice to show up and do the work. It was in the meals cooked and the people fed and the small acts of dignity that added up to a life. She'd stepped off that stagecoach unwanted, carrying nothing but a recipe book and quiet determination. She'd faced rejection and cruelty, and every attempt to erase her. And she'd won. Not by becoming someone else, not by making herself smaller or more acceptable. She'd won by refusing to disappear, by insisting on her own value even when the world insisted otherwise. She became the reason that ranch existed, not because she was perfect, but because she was exactly herself at exactly the right time in exactly the right place. And sometimes, that was all anyone needed to be. The fire in the stove burned low as Rhea closed her mother's recipe book for the night. She'd added another entry to the margins, one final note for whoever might read it someday. I learned that belonging isn't about finding people who think you're perfect. It's about finding people who see you clearly, all of you, the good and the difficult and the complicated, and choose you anyway, and then choosing them back with the same clarity and courage. She set the book aside and went to bed, where Calder was already sleeping, one arm flung out across her pillow. She slid in beside him, and he pulled her close without waking, a gesture so familiar now it felt like breathing. Outside, the ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of night. The hands in the bunkhouse, the cattle in the fields, the land itself seemed to rest. And Rhea Callan, who'd once had nothing and nowhere, slept peacefully in the home she'd built from scraps and determination and the radical act of refusing to apologize for existing. She'd arrived unwanted, she'd stayed unbreakable, and in the end she hadn't just found a home, she'd become the foundation on which it stood.